All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Gnostic Marxism. Feminized woke leftists inherit Gnosticism in Satan's name, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. The Gnostic cuckoldry of the woke West, weaponizing the trivium to smash the feminist spectacle and master the unblinking stare. You are living inside a hallucination, a neon-lit fake reality constructed by those who despise the very flesh they inhabit. I look at the modern woke left and I do not see a political movement. I see the ancient Gnostic heresy of the 2nd century reborn in Satan's name to hate the material world, biology, hierarchy, and truth replaced by a society of the spectacle, where feelings supersede facts. They have weaponized empathy to turn the Western male into a draft animal for their emotional whims, and it is time to smash the screen. You see the evidence of this spiritual rot everywhere, from the corporate tribunal where a man is fired for failing to worship at the altar of lived experience, to the cold, hard facts that while men commit the vast majority of suicides, our tax dollars fund domestic violence shelters that legally bar men from entry, leaving us to die in gutters while our oppressors claim victimhood. They are testing you, throwing tantrums to see if you will engage with reason or collapse into a beta state of submission. I am going to show you how to hold that gaze, how to master the storm, and how to use the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric to cut through the lies of cultural Marxism like a hot knife through butter, reclaiming the transcendent spirit of the West before the Gnostic void swallows us whole. We will strip away the toxic femininity that demands you apologize for your existence and replace it with the stoic resolve of our ancestors, proving that the only way to win this game is to realize it was rigged by people who hate the game itself. The matrix is cracking, and I hold the hammer. The spectacle of Gnostic delusion. I recall the precise moment when the massive deception fractured for everyone to witness. It wasn't within a philosophy classroom or during a solitary session with Nietzsche's writings, but in a Virginia courtroom where the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard legal battle unfolded. For an extended period, society had been force-fed the spectacle that disconnected, fabricated reality described by Guy Debord, where imagery replaces truth, where the damsel in distress narrative ruled and men were automatically cast as monsters. Yet there she stood, the embodiment of victimhood exposed and dismantled by undeniable audio recordings and photographic evidence. The victim persona unmasked herself as the perpetrator, allowing millions of men worldwide who had been intimidated by the believe all women ideology to finally breathe freely. This represented the defining awakening of our era, a methodical examination of feminist discourse where tangible proof of male suffering dismantled the fabricated portrayal of female oppression. The jurors examined the facts, disregarded the inflammatory language, and recognized the truth. Women can indeed function as predatory aggressors in relationships, and the judicial system had been manipulated to conceal this reality. This extended beyond a mere celebrity separation. It was when society's constructed illusion faltered, demonstrating that the entire cultural Marxist framework regarding power dynamics represents a manufactured falsehood intended to deprive men of their resources and dignity. This delusion is nothing new. It is a resurrected ancient heresy wearing the skin of social justice. If you trace the genealogical roots of this cultural rot back through the corridors of history, you will find the stench of Gnosticism. The ancient Gnostics hated the material world. They viewed the body, biology, and physical reality as prisons of the soul, crafted by an evil demiurge. Sound familiar? It should, because the modern leftist is obsessed with escaping the prison of biology. They hate the material fact of sex differences, despise the biological reality of muscle and bone, and loathe the natural order of hierarchy. This is the satanic era the Church Fathers fought for centuries, and now it has returned as gender theory and intersectionality. By declaring that biological reality is a social construct, they are engaging in the ultimate Gnostic rebellion, a hatred of the creation itself. They tell you that your nature as a man, a being of logic, strength, and direct action, is something to be overcome, silenced, or apologized for. This is the hatred of the Logos, the divine reason that structures the universe, and it is the driving force behind every critical theory spewed from the universities. To maintain this delusion, they must corrupt the very tools of thought. The trivium. They begin by attacking grammar, the foundation of meaning. If they can control the definition of words, they control the thoughts of the masses. They have redefined violence to include misgendering or criticism, thereby equating verbal disagreement with physical assault. They have redefined racism to include systemic power dynamics, a Marxist linguistic trick designed to make the crime irremovable and the accusation unfalsifiable. Next, they assault logic, replacing reason and syllogism with lived experience and emotion. In a debate, a leftist will inevitably abandon the premise when cornered by facts, fleeing into the safe space of their feelings. This is why they cannot argue. They can only shriek, cancel, and deplatform. Finally, they have weaponized rhetoric, turning the art of persuasion into a tool of tyranny. They do not persuade with truth. They shout down opposition with the amplified cries of the oppressed, creating a noise chamber where the truth cannot breathe. This is the corruption of the Logos, a deliberate strategy to make rational discourse impossible. Underneath this philosophical assault lies a cold, ruthless evolutionary biology that exposes the cuckold strategy of the modern welfare state. We must look this ugly truth in the eye. In the natural order, high investment males, you build, you protect, you provide. Select mates who value your resource investment. However, the modern genocentric state has inverted this dynamic. The welfare state acts as the alpha provider, stripping men of their utility and forcing high investment males to subsidize the reproductive strategies of low investment males and the impulsive, low conscientiousness women who select them. When the state funds the illegitimate children of bad boys and deadbeats, it is effectively taxing the productive male to ensure the genes of the reckless are propagated. This is a violation of natural law, a forced cuckoldry where the industrious man is enslaved to support the genetic legacy of the parasite. The family court is the executioner of this strategy, severing the father from his wealth and his progeny to feed the matriarchal machine. This is not charity, it is a transfer of vitality from the builders of civilization to its destroyers. The psychological mechanism driving this is pure pathology, projection. The woke mind is defined by a frantic need to project its own shadow onto its enemies. They accuse men of toxicity and cruelty, yet who is it that screams for violence against political opponents? Who tears apart families in cold courtrooms? It is them. They are the wicked stepmothers of fairy tales, the destroyers of innocence, and they dare to point the finger at us. This psychological displacement allows them to maintain their self-image as the saviors while they act as the oppressors. It is a form of spiritual madness, a possession by the ideology of death. They hate the West because the West is built on the Logos, on objective truth, hierarchy, and the transcendent, and their ideology requires the negation of all three. They are the agents of entropy, the chaos that seeks to devour the order we built. We must recognize that when a civilization feminizes its gods and its laws, it severs its own connection to the will to power. Look at history. Every culture that elevated the feminine principle over the masculine, the receptive over the active, the emotional over the rational, fell to the sword of a more virile, patriarchal culture. This is the inevitable syllogism of history. Feminization presages the fall. The West is currently castrating itself, offering its neck to the butcher block of globalist Marxism in the name of equity. We are witnessing the suicide of the greatest culture in the known universe, driven by a collective psychosis that views masculinity as a pathology. The remedy is not policy, it is a spiritual reclamation. We must re-enshrine the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful by reviving the masculine spirit of Western civilization. We must wield the trivium like a weapon to slice through the veil of the spectacle and expose the rotting corpse of cultural Marxism beneath. We reject the weakness, the lies, and the cuckoldry of the modern era. We choose to live in the real world, in the flesh, fully men, armed with the truth and ready to rebuild what they have destroyed. You see Marcus there, trapped in the beige purgatory of bureaucratic malice. And I tell you, his failure is not one of intellect, but of spiritual defense. He believes he is in a meeting, but he is actually standing on the sacrificial altar of the Gnostic lie, offering his logic to a God that only consumes submission. To survive this gauntlet, a man must stop treating the hysterical rage of the left as a valid dialectic and start seeing it for what it is. A biological assault on the nervous system intended to trigger a cortisol cascade that renders him docile. The path forward requires us to master the internal storm, to weaponize Stoicism not as a hobby, but as a necessary shield against the chaos, and to learn the art of rhetorical judo that flips the script on these emotional tyrants. The crucible of Stoic resolve. The air conditioning in the beige conference room hummed a monotonous B-flat, the kind of sterile background noise designed to lull the mind into compliance, but for Marcus, the silence was screaming. He sat across the table from Brenda, the human resources director whose entire career was built not on productivity, but on the weaponization of grievance. Brenda's eyes were dry, but her voice shook with a practiced tremulous rage as she reviewed the dossier of his crimes, a series of factually correct emails she had flagged as aggressive and tone-deaf. Marcus, a man of the trivium, tried to defend himself with syllogisms and evidence, pointing to the raw data that proved his efficiency. It was a mistake. You cannot use a slide rule on a witch trial. Brenda did not care about the truth. She cared about the feeling of the truth, and in the corporate tribunal of the woke left, feelings are the only evidence that matters. This is the crucible, my friend, and if you enter it armed only with logic while your opponent wields the raw, chaotic fury of the Gnostic feminine, you will lose. This is the reality for the modern man, entrapped in a system designed to grind his rational nature into dust, to feed a pathology that demands submission to the delusion of the day. You must realize that Stoicism is not merely a philosophy to be read in a leather armchair. It is a biological imperative, a survival mechanism against the chaotic energy of the Gnostic left. When I speak of mastering the internal storm, I'm talking about defending your very biology. The leftist ideology functions like a pathogen, attacking the host's ability to regulate emotion. We are witnessing an evolutionary mismatch where the female capacity for emotional signaling, once a tool for nurturing kin within a tribe, has been hijacked by Marxists and weaponized into a political battering ram. To survive this, you must see the management of your emotions as a defense against a viral ideology. The Gnostic Marxist wants you to feel their despair, their envy, and their resentment. If you open the door to their chaos, you let them rewrite the code of your mind. You must build a wall of reason, not out of spite, but out of the sheer necessity to preserve your sanity against a collective insanity that demands you apologize for your own existence. This is where rhetorical judo becomes your greatest weapon. When the screeching harpy of cultural Marxism demands you apologize for your privilege, you do not argue the definition of privilege. You refuse the premise entirely. The moment you accept their terminology, you have already lost because you are playing on a board where the rules are fixed against you. You must look them in the eye and calmly dismantle the frame of their reality. If they scream you're being aggressive, simply state, I'm being direct. Precision is not aggression. This is the art of the logos. It is about maintaining the frame of reality over the frame of delusion. Do not let them shift the goalposts. Do not let them control the grammar of the debate. By refusing to accept their emotionally charged premises, you force them to step into the light of logic, where they invariably burn. We must view this dynamic through the lens of the ultimate shit test of civilization. What the left and the feminized hordes are doing is not a political debate, it is a dominance test, a political gauntlet thrown at the feet of masculine reason. In evolutionary biology, a female tests a male to see if he can withstand stress, to see if he is strong enough to lead, or if he is weak enough to manipulate. The left is doing this to Western civilization on a macro scale. They dump histrionic emotional garbage on us, ridiculous theories, fake victimhood, contradictory narratives to see if we will break. They want to see if we will apologize, if we will capitulate, if we will adopt the posture of the beta male seeking to lower conflict through submission. But when you apologize to a lie, you do not get peace, you get eaten. They are testing to see if there is a patriarch left standing who can handle the sheer intensity of their narcissistic rage, and if you fail this test, you lose your culture. The cost of failing this test is not just social, it is written in your blood. We have the data, we have the facts, and they are terrifying. When a man capitulates to gaslighting, when he nods his head to the insane ramblings of a feminist ideologue just to keep the peace, his body reacts as if he has lost a physical fight. Research shows cortisol spikes and testosterone suppression in men who back down to social dominance posturing. Toxic femininity, the demand that the world cater to feelings over facts, is a literal biological weapon against male vitality. We see the fallout in the suicide rates of divorced fathers, stripped of their assets and dignity by a gynocentric court system that views them only as ATM machines. We see it in the cuckoldry rates and the explosion of mental health issues among young men raised to hate themselves. Submission to the matriarchy is a death sentence for the male spirit and body. The remedy, gentlemen, is the logos. The only cure for the emotional chaos of the feminized mind is the rigid, unapologetic structure of masculine logic and the pursuit of objective truth. The Gnostic left rejects the material world, rejects the body, rejects nature itself in favor of a purely internal, subjective fantasy. They are the spiritual heirs of the ancient Gnostics who hated the flesh, and they are led by the spirit of the age, which is frankly Satan's rebellion against the order of creation. You cannot defeat a lie with a hug. You defeat it with the truth. The Western canon, from the Greeks to the Romans, through the Enlightenment and beyond, is not a collection of dead words. It is the operating manual for high civilization. It is the weapon of the philosopher king, who knows that the good, the true, and the beautiful are not social constructs, but transcendental absolutes that stand in judgment of the leftist delusion. Finally, we must understand the shutdown versus engage dialectic. For too long, men have chosen the beta response: shutdown, appeasement, and apology. It is the rabbit freezing in the headlights, hoping the wolf gets tired of eating. This strategy has brought us to the brink of extinction. We must adopt the sigma or alpha response: engage, dissect, and dominate. When they come for you with their critical theory drivel, you do not retreat to your safe space. You walk right into the fire. You dissect their arguments with the precision of a surgeon. You expose their fallacies, you mock their hypocrisy, and you dominate the intellectual space. This is how we save our civilization. We stop apologizing for being right. We stop bowing to the idols of feelings. We pick up the mantle of Stoic resolve, and we show these Gnostic Marxists that the spirit of the West is not dead. It was just sleeping, and it is awake, and it is furious. I have armed your mind with the Stoic endurance to withstand their histrionic storms and the dialectic weaponry to dismantle their lies, but do not mistake this preparation for a game of academic fencing. We are entering a war zone where the enemy has historically silenced truth with violence and intimidation. The emotional warfare you face in the workplace is merely a shadow of the physical and existential destruction that awaits anyone who dares to pull back the curtain on the matriarchal fraud, a legacy of terror that began long before the modern woke corporation was even conceived. We must look to the past to understand the enemy's true nature. And there is no more brutal or illuminating lesson than the fate of the woman who pioneered the very concept of domestic violence shelters only to be hunted by her own sisters. Consider the fate of Erin Pizzey. The architecture of misandric exclusion. Consider the fate of Erin Pizzey, the pioneering woman who opened the world's first domestic violence shelter in 1971, expecting to find a sisterhood of victims, but instead discovered a den of violent, matriarchal cruelty. When she dared to publish her findings that women were equally as capable of violence as men, the leftist cabal didn't debate her. They tried to destroy her. They killed her dog, threatened her children, and drove her into exile with a campaign of terror that proves the movement was never about safety, but about silencing any heretic who questions the dogma of female victimhood. This is your historical precedent. A stark lesson that the architects of the modern victimhood industrial complex do not seek justice. They seek a monopoly on suffering. And they will crush anyone who exposes the reality that women can be the architects of their own misery and the misery of others. If we are to restore the good, true, and beautiful foundations of our civilization, we must look at this history not as a tragedy, but as the design of the enemy's strategy. To believe in the patriarchy requires a level of cognitive dissonance that borders on the suicidal. You are asked to accept the absurdity that men, a demographic dying in the streets from hypothermia, at rates dwarfing female homelessness, conspired to build a system that exclusively privileges men. If the patriarchy were real, every city would be lined with state-of-the-art shelters for displaced men, funded by the taxes of the grateful populace. Instead, when a man is battered, bruised, and cast out of his home by a violent spouse, the state apparatus looks the other way, or worse, labels him the aggressor. This is the conspiracy theory of the century, a ruling class of men that refuses to lift a finger to save its own. The lack of male resources is the empirical proof that the patriarchy is a ghost story told to frighten women into the arms of the state, which has effectively replaced the husband as the sole protector and provider. Men are not the masters of the universe. They are the utilities, the infrastructure, the meat in the grinder, taxed to fund a system that views their pain as statistically irrelevant. This systemic erasure is not an accident of bureaucracy. It is the direct result of the Duluth model, a twisted ideological doctrine that has infected the legal systems of the Western world like a spiritual pathogen. Created by a cabal of Marxist feminists, this model explicitly frames domestic violence not as a crime of passion or loss of control, but as a political act of patriarchal terrorism. Under this dogma, the very existence of a male victim is a logical impossibility, a contradiction in terms. Police officers trained in this methodology are taught that in a heterosexual dispute, the man is the primary aggressor by default regardless of who actually called 911 or who bears the physical marks. This is the wickedness of cultural Marxism. It replaces investigation with indoctrination, swapping evidence for narrative, ensuring that the only solution offered to a battered man is a prison cell. Consequently, we face a statistical vacuum so profound it screams of intentional malice. While billions are funneled into female-only facilities, the infrastructure for male victims is virtually non-existent. In the United States, of the thousands of domestic violence shelters, a mere handful accept men, and often only if they are transgender, thereby prioritizing identity politics over biological suffering. We see the suicide rates of divorced fathers skyrocketing, knowing that the family court system is rigged against them, yet there is no outcry. This is the architecture of misandric exclusion, a deliberate policy of silence where the data on male abuse is suppressed, underfunded, and ignored. It is a moral ledger where the debts owed to men are written in invisible ink, ensuring that when a man breaks, he does so alone, unseen and uncounted. This brings us to the evolutionary race to the bottom, a biological catastrophe unleashed by removing the constraints of civilization from female behavior. As Schopenhauer observed, the female will is oriented toward the immediate and the acquisition of resources, and by implementing a welfare state that incentivizes hypergamy and removes the biological consequences of mate selection, we have incentivized the absolute worst aspects of female nature. We have created a culture where deceit and cruelty are profitable mating strategies, where a woman can destroy a family, abscond with the children and the assets, and be rewarded by the state with the husband's wages. This is the feminizing of policy, a cloying, soft tyranny that disguises itself as compassion, while it guts the masculine impulse to build, protect, and provide, rewarding instead the instinct to consume, manipulate, and discard. We must recognize that the social contract has been rewritten in blood-red ink, and men have been excluded from the negotiation. The state has usurped the role of the husband, offering women provision and protection without the traditional requirement of reciprocity or gratitude. Men have been reduced to tax farms and sperm donors, disposable utilities whose labor fuels the very machinery that grinds them into dust. If we wish to preserve the living spirit of Western civilization, the rational, the logical, the strong, we must stop playing a game that is rigged for our destruction. We must recognize that the pathologies we face are not bugs in the system, but features of a system designed to maximize the extraction of male utility while minimizing the value of male life. The remedy, the only logical antidote to this venom, is the reconstruction of male spaces. We need sanctuaries where the trivium rules supreme, where logic, rhetoric, and grammar are wielded to dissect the lies of the left without fear of social ostracization. We need environments where men can speak the truth about their experiences with family courts, false accusations, and societal rejection, finding solidarity in shared reality rather than shame in shared victimhood. Just as the monasteries preserved the light of knowledge during the Dark Ages, these male sanctuaries will preserve the flame of reason and the transcendental ideals of the West. By reclaiming our right to associate, to speak, and to exist for our own sake, we dismantle the Gnostic illusion that our suffering is necessary for the greater good and assert the undeniable truth. The salvation of the West depends on the salvation of the Western man. We have catalogued the structural treason that leaves men to die on the streets while the state harvests their taxes to fund the matriarchy, yet statistics alone will not save us from the cultural Gorgon. The leap from the systemic erasure of the male victim to the active confrontation of the woke mob requires a weapon far more primal than spreadsheets, the resurrection of the masculine will. We must move beyond the passive observation of feminist cruelty and grasp the biological imperative to stare down the lie. The war for the West is no longer fought in the shadows of domestic violence shelters. It is fought in the open, terrifying glare of the eye contact that refuses to blink, the unblinking eye of the patriarch. Consider the composite account of a professor of biology at a Midwestern university who, when confronted by a screeching mob of gender studies, students demanding he retract his statement that biological sex is binary and immutable, declined to apologize. He stood at the podium, a bastion of reason amidst the estrogen-fueled chaos, and simply stared at them. He did not lower his head. He did not adopt the submissive posture of the gelded academic who usually grovels for forgiveness. He held the gaze of the ringleader, a woman whose face contorted in a mask of hysterical rage, and he refused to blink. In that moment, the atmosphere in the room changed noticeably. The mob realized, perhaps for the first time in their soft, pampered lives, that they were confronting a man who held the transcendental ego of Western rationality that declines to be dissolved by their collective emotional spasm. This is the alpha state, not a performative display of arrogance, but the unshakable alignment with fact. When you are right, you have no biological imperative to yield. You do not stutter, you do not apologize for the laws of nature, and you do not look away. This refusal to blink is the evolutionary test of dominance that predates their fake sociology degrees by millions of years. In the animal kingdom, and we are animals whether they like it or not, the one who breaks eye contact is admitting submission, acknowledging that his survival depends on the mercy of the other. The left cannot look you in the eye because their entire ideology is a spectral house of cards, built on the shifting sands of feelings rather than the bedrock of reality. They fear the judgment of the masculine eye because deep down in their reptilian brains, they know the patriarchy they scream about is simply the natural order of competence, protection, and civilization. They are the spiritual descendants of the serpent in the garden, offering the fruit of subjective truth. But when a man stares them down with the cold, hard logic of the trivium, they slither back into the shadows. They are spiritually incapable of maintaining the gaze because they have nothing behind their eyes but the void of their own nihilism. We must view the modern feminist not as a victim, but as a gorgon of the new age attempting to turn men to stone, not physically, but socially and psychologically, using the petrifying rays of shame, guilt, and toxic masculinity. She seeks to paralyze your will with the Medusa-like head of manufactured victimhood. But here is the secret they have hidden from you. The man who has mastered the trivium, logic, rhetoric, grammar, holds the polished shield of the mind. When she shrieks her accusations, you do not cower. You reflect her own absurdity back to her. You hold the mirror up to her narrative, showing her the grotesque reality of a movement that champions the killing of the unborn while ignoring the paternity fraud rates that suggest men are raising children that aren't even theirs, and she turns herself to stone. Her power exists only if you accept the premise of her guilt. If you look at her without flinching, armed with the facts of the family court system that strips fathers of their children in the majority of cases, the spell breaks and she is reduced to the bitter, lonely reality of her own making. When you reject the spectacle, to use the terminology of Guy Debord, and engage in this radical act of eye contact, you reclaim authenticity. The modern world is a simulation, a spectacle of lies where men are told they are oppressors and women are told they are perpetual victims. A narrative designed to make you hate yourself so you can be more easily governed. But the moment you refuse to break the gaze, you pierce the veil of this Marxist unreality. You create an authentic culture in the microsecond of confrontation, a bubble of reality where the truth still exists. This is why they hate you. This is why they try to deplatform you, because your gaze proves that their world is a fake. By simply looking at them and not looking away, you are saying, "I see the lie." You are validating the objective universe over their subjective delusion. This is how we take back the good, true, and beautiful, defining them not as the whims of a passing emotion, but as the objective standards that can only be upheld by a rational masculine mind. Ultimately, the restoration of our civilization requires this ultimate strategy. You must look the devil in the eye and laugh. You must laugh at the absurdity of critical theory. You must laugh at the hypocrisy of a movement that claims to care about equality, but creates a matriarchy of victimhood. You must look at the statistics, the suicide rates of divorced fathers, the paternity fraud rates, the cultural collapse, and you must refuse to blink. We rebuild the West not by apologizing, but by standing firm on the bedrock of logic, biology, and unapologetic masculinity. We look at the chaos they have wrought, the gender-bending madness, the erasure of fatherhood, and we do not flinch. We hold the line. We are the unblinking eye of the patriarch, and the darkness fears the light. You have walked through the fire of the lie and emerged with your sanity clutched tight in your fist. We have systematically dismantled the Gnostic heresy of the left, exposing how their hatred of the material world, the biological reality of sex, and the immutable laws of physics is merely Satan's ancient error dressed up in a pink pantsuit of social justice. You see now that the spectacle is a hologram designed to hide the fact that you are being farmed, a tax-paying cuckold in a system where family courts strip fathers of their children and male domestic violence victims are left to freeze on the streets because the patriarchy mysteriously forgot to build them a shelter. This isn't a tragedy. It is a calculated evolutionary heist, and now you possess the forensic evidence to prove it, from the absurdity of the gender wage gap myth to the cold reality of male suicide rates. Arm yourself with the trivium and go forth into the battlefield of the everyday. When some scowling priestess of the woke cult tries to drown you in histrionic emotion to test if you will shut down, do not flinch. Engage with the smirk of a man who knows the emperor has no clothes. Using logic as a scalpel to dissect their hysteria while maintaining that unblinking eye contact which signals to their primitive hindbrain that you are the alpha reality they cannot gaslight. You have mastered the stoic art of holding the frame, understanding that to submit to their feelings is to surrender your biology to a toxin. You are no longer a passive observer in the theater of the absurd. You are the director who yells cut and rips down the fake backdrop of cultural Marxism. This is your moment to reclaim the living spirit of Western civilization from the grip of the feminine imperative. Do not hoard this red pill. Shove it down the throat of every blue-pilled simp you meet with the relentless aggression of truth. You are the remnant of the Logos, the only thing standing between order and total collapse. Go out there, look the devil in the eye, laugh at his absurdities, and rebuild a world where the good, the true, and the beautiful are not subjective feelings, but the iron laws of the land. The war for reality is won one conversation at a time, and you are now fully armed. And now the sponsored book introduction, Gnostic Marxism. Feminized woke leftists inherit Gnosticism in Satan's name. For years I watched the world unravel. I saw men broken by systems that claimed to help them, boys raised without fathers, and truth replaced with slogans. I saw universities turn into echo chambers, workplaces become confessionals, and language twisted into weapons. I saw strong men silenced for speaking plainly, while the weak rose on victim status. I asked myself, how did we get here? Why does every progressive movement end in chaos, resentment, and decay? The answer wasn't in economics, it wasn't in sociology. It was buried in ancient spiritual lies repackaged as modern liberation. I spent a decade tracing the roots of this madness. I studied Gnosticism not as a relic, but as a living virus. I read Marx not as a political theorist, but as a heretic. I compared their writings side by side and realized Marx didn't invent anything. He stole the Gnostic myth and dressed it in materialist clothing. The world is evil. The body is a prison. The elite are demons. Salvation comes through revolution. The promised utopia is just beyond the next purge. It's not philosophy, it's religion. A blood cult with economics as its liturgy and the state as its high priest. I've lived inside this lie. I once believed in equality as a moral imperative. I thought dismantling hierarchies would free people. Then I watched as every institution that embraced that idea collapsed from within. Schools stopped teaching, companies stopped innovating, men stopped trying. Why strive when effort is sin? Why lead when leadership is oppression? I saw the war on masculinity not as a side effect, but as the point. The goal isn't equality, it's erasure. The target isn't patriarchy, it's men. This book is not for everyone. If you believe gender is a social construct, that capitalism is the root of all evil, or that your identity entitles you to special treatment, you will hate this book. Close it now. Go back to your safe spaces, your trigger warnings, your virtue signals. This is not for the weak, the dishonest, or the indoctrinated. This is for men who have woken up, men who feel the weight of responsibility, men who know they were born to lead, build, and protect, not to apologize for existing. You are the target. Your strength is feared. Your independence is dangerous to the system. That's why they call your ambition toxic. That's why they pathologize your confidence. That's why they replace merit with quotas and courage with compliance. They don't want you to succeed. They want you to serve. And if you refuse, they'll cancel you, shame you, or break you. This book names the enemy, not just politicians or activists, but the spiritual force behind them. The same force that told ancient Gnostics they were divine sparks trapped in flesh now tells modern men they are oppressors trapped in privilege. Same lie, new costume. Inside these pages, you'll see how materialism became the demiurge, how victimhood became a religion, and how collectivism became the weapon used to destroy the heroic male spirit. You'll understand why socialist utopias always end in mass graves, why feminism and Marxism are not movements, but mutations of the same spiritual virus, why language is being weaponized to erase biology, why the father is the first casualty of every leftist regime, and why every red pill man is a rebel in a war he didn't start but must win. This is not theory, this is survival. I've tested these ideas in real life, in business, in relationships, in raising sons. I've seen men come back from apathy, depression, and self-loathing once they understood the game. Once they realized they weren't broken, they were targeted. You'll learn how to reclaim your mind, your mission, and your manhood. How to build sovereignty in a world designed to make you a servant. How to lead without permission. How to thrive without approval. If you are a man who still believes in truth, hierarchy, and the sacred duty of the strong to protect the weak, if you reject the cult of victimhood and the soft tyranny of wokeism, then this book is your weapon. Read it, study it, use it. The West is not dead. Heroism is not obsolete. The sovereign man is rising. Gnostic Marxism. Feminized woke leftists inherit Gnosticism in Satan's name, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now. Links in description.